Hey everybody, Luke Thomas here. I'm in my hotel room in Jersey City. It's Saturday, November 25th. In a few minutes I have to head over to the studios to do the prelims for the very last Showtime boxing pay-per-view, which is both sad and still a fun opportunity, but not what I'm here to talk about. I'm actually here to talk about some MMA that I saw last night. So last night in my hometown of Washington, D.C., I went to the PFL World Championship, their finale for their most recent season. It took place at the Anthem, which is this brand new sort of concert facility right on the redeveloped waterfront, which is called the DC Wharf. I wasn't sure how that was going to look. I think in the end it actually looked pretty good, although the setup was kind of weird. I have some pictures, or a picture from my seat I can show you, but the basic idea is that they apparently had it situated for 2,800 people, and they told me it was a sellout. Now, if you looked on the broadcast, you might have noticed that there were a lot of, like, at times, empty seats in various places. It's just a really unusual setup where the cage is not quite in the center; it's still much more the front, and they built these screens out behind it, which, by the way, were like blaring advertisements constantly, but. They have balconies at the Anthem, and you could see people situated in the balconies. And I don't know, like there was at times where you'd look around and it'd be like a lot of the seats were filled. So whether or not it was a sellout, I don't really know, but that's what they told us. Take it for what that is worth. But I did think that I did think it looked pretty good. I went back and I watched the broadcast. I thought it looked good I looked better on the broadcast than it did in person, but it still looked fun and inviting and modern and. Sleek is not the word I would use, the setup, but it's big and it's quite noticeable, the production apparatus, but nevertheless, not a lot of bad seats is what I would say. I think in general, most people had a pretty good angle to go watch the fights, and again, they have enough of a unique presentation to make it kind of stand out and pop. The screens in the back also, I do think, while they were used for advertising way too much, still add a lot. BC texted me today, and he was like, did it feel like a major event? And the answer I would give to that question, I told BC this, is basically close, but not quite. One, there wasn't just enough people there. I mean, even if it was 2,800, that's just not a ton of people, although the venue is intimate and they're taking up a lot of floor space with that cage. But more to the point, it was weird. Like, the Anthem is just not it's a cool venue for concerts. It's definitely modern. It's only been around for a few years. But like, for example, the media room was just like an office room, and it was like cramped and there was nowhere to go. The presser, I think, was held there. And, we're talking like not much bigger than my hotel room here. Like, not big at all. Not the kind of place where these things were designed for that. And, the average MMA fan is not going to care about that, which I get. But I mean, here's what I would say after watching the fights themselves. It felt to me like the fights were of quality. It felt to me like the winners were very deserving. There were good stories in many of the cases. We'll go through some of the results here in just a second. But it did feel like there was a couple of issues that stood out to me. Number one, the lack of elbows. I think by the time you get to the finals at a bare minimum, they need to allow those back. It really stalls the action when people can't throw it. That's true both standing and on the ground. And it just really limits what people can do. And I think, for example, like Kayla Harrison really has her ground and pound opportunities narrowed by virtue of some of these rules. So I really don't like that at all. And the other part too is like they would have Jake Paul like Skype in, and you would see his picture on the screen during one of the fights, or, almost like they're doing a Manning cast on the regular broadcast. I don't think they need any of that shit. When the fights were over, they went to a stat of like which three fighters had the three fastest strikes, and they were all like 24 or 23 miles an hour. And it's like, dude, what am I supposed to do with this information? Right? Now I know the three fighters who threw the three fastest strikes, all of which are less than the speed limit for a car in a school zone in the United States of America. Like, what does this even mean? So there's just a lot of stuff on the broadcast that is utterly extraneous, both, with the speed of the strike or whatever, and they got better about minimizing it. It was smaller on the screen, but then they would have this shit on there where it's like Jake Paul calling in. There was other guests that they had throughout I think they had Wiz Khalifa on there, like, oh, Wiz, what should they do? Oh, he should go more to the body. It's like, dude, Wiz is, I like him just as much as the next guy, but I don't really know what this is really adding to the broadcast. And it just feels to me like this kind of stuff needs to just go away. Like, or at a bare minimum, if you want to offer that kind of stuff, do that on a separate feed. Don't do it on the main feed. And then, as I mentioned, like it was Grabaka Hitman on Twitter. Kaposa was basically arguing, I think quite correctly, that what they're offering is a violence product, and you're minimizing that relative to one, which has found ways to accentuate those rules, both the rule set and then like what they do with the 4-ounce Muay Thai. And you're going in the opposite direction. Like, that just did not work, I think, for a lot of folks. It limits what the fighters can do. It limits the fights themselves. It's just not great. It's not great at all. Also, guys, the first time I think the new Zuffa era team was involved with the UFC pay-per-view, it went over the time limit because they didn't budget their time appropriately for the amount of fights that they have. And that's sort of one of these rules where they usually only had 1 or 2 title fights. They've gone to 3 now for the UFC, but they don't do more than that. They don't do more than that for a reason. And I remember when Strikeforce did their event, I don't know if it was I forget which event it was, where they had, I think it was the event where King Mo beat Gegard Mousasi. They had 3 title fights. All 3 went the full distance on network television. Dude, it drags. It drags. You can't do 5 title fights. Now, obviously not all of them went the distance, but many of them went the distance. Certainly surprising in cases like Larissa Pacheco's fight. They've really got to get... I mean, baseball has instituted a pitch clock for their game to speed it up, and they noticed immediate dividends, not so much with the World Series where the teams were, small or basically mid-major teams, but the attendance during the regular season and everything else was up because the game fucking moved. And you're like, well, the NFL can go pretty long with 3.5-hour games, but they're the king of sports here in this country. Obviously, it's a different story overseas, but soccer is only 2 45-minute halves. Like, they had a main card that was nearly, 4.5 fucking, almost 5 hours. Almost a 5-hour main card. It went from 8 to like 12:45 in the morning East Coast time. This is entirely too long. This is entirely too long. There is no way a major broadcast partner... Not that obviously the ESPN went along with it, or pay-per-view anyway, but there's no way that they're in favor of this. There's no way they think that's a good idea. I guarantee there is not a single sports executive that would say in television it's better to have more title fights than 3 because of what prestige it adds to the broadcast. Like, and again, these problems are not so simple to solve. You have to break it up over maybe 2 days to get it right, which of course costs more. And I realize that these are not easy things to do. Plus, you have to sell the house now for 2 days if you do that. I'm just telling you, a nearly 5-hour main card with a bunch of 5-round fights on it. This is not in keeping with modern sports broadcasting guidelines. It's not fan friendly, and it needs to go. I will say, though, there were some things that worked. Again, I thought overall the presentation in-house looked pretty good in general. I thought the presentation looked much better even on television, so it was good in person. It was very good, I thought, on television. I will also say some of the Bellator integration was pretty cool. They had a face-off between some of the champs who were in attendance. We'll get to some of these results, but Jesus Pinedo won the 45 tournament. He faced off with Pitbull. That was pretty cool. They had Jason Jackson face off with Magomedkerimov. That was, by the way, that fight's super cool. I think they did not have Impa Kasanganay face off against Vadim Nemkov, who I did not see there. But they did this a few times. Ryan Bader, I think, had Skyped in for a time, which was, again, like, why is he there forever? I didn't really quite get it. But, I thought that setting those fights up, making that future event, the Bellator versus the PFL guys, making that feel big, they actually did a pretty good job with that. I really thought that was great. So 2 thumbs up on that, building anticipation, building awareness. They keep going back to calling it a global MMA powerhouse. You can decide whether or not you think that's true, but that part to me went really well. So there was definitely some positives. The crowd was lively. They seemed to enjoy it. My seat, they had me in a van down by the river. They had me in the furthest away you could put anyone in media. And listen, I'm not asking, this is going to sound kind of, if you've never covered it as a media, you're going to be like, oh, they want special treatment. I don't want special treatment. Guys, if the fight's in my hometown, I would like to go see it. But if my seat in my office gives me a better view than going, why the fuck would I go? Why would you go? Oh, to interview those people. But that's not what we really do here. Like, the junkies do that. The MMA fightings do that. By the way, there was I think only me and MMA Junkie, I could be wrong about this. So I double check this. But I'll just say the vast majority of the media that was there were paid to be there, which, they can disclose it if they want. Not everybody, but a lot. But they had me all the way in the back. I couldn't see shit. I had to watch the screens in order to see the fights. So it's like, what? Again, grateful for the opportunity to go. Grateful for the opportunity to cover the sport. But like, doesn't do me much good to go to an event where I have a shittier vantage point than I would if I was just sitting at my fucking desk. So that wasn't great. But you don't care about that, nor do I expect you to care about that. I will say this, PFL staff, very friendly, very accommodating, very nice. I don't think that they put me in that seat as some kind of punishment or anything like that. I just think the way it was arranged, I mean, the A row, there was only 2 rows of media, A row and B row. I was in the B row, kind of centered. The A row barely had a better seat than me. Their situation was fucked up too. So not a great seat for that kind of work. Again, that's sort of like a media criticism that I don't expect you to care about. But yeah, they had me in a van down by the river. I couldn't see shit. So that part sucked. All right. As for the results themselves, we'll go main event down, and I'll just kind of touch on these very briefly. Olivier Aubin-Mercier defeats Clay Collard. Pretty good fight. Aubin-Mercier, OAM, the Canadian gangster, his grappling is overwhelming. He's really good at transition. He's really good at making you wrestle to your hands. He's really good about finding the back, keeping the back, threatening from the back, power half, hooks in, body triangle. He was just kind of all over Collard. Collard doing work later in that fight, going to the body the whole time, beating up his leg. OAM got tested in this one, but in the end, too skilled, too big, too strong, too experienced. Second tournament in a row that he won. He's made $2 million plus from being in the PFL. He told MMA Junkies Mike Bond after the fight that this is in all likelihood retirement. He didn't declare it's retirement. He did declare he was going to take a year off and then see where he's at. But, he's 34. At that point, he'll be 35. Does he really want to come back? So he's like, in all likelihood, it probably is, but it wasn't the official I'm never fighting again. But he'll be gone for a long time. So you're like, well, who's the 155 champ going to be in the Bellator face-off situation? I don't know how they're going to handle that. I don't know what they're going to do. I guess they just won't have, I guess they just won't do that. Also, we need to know who the champ is in Bellator because Usman obviously lost his and the tournament has to continue. So there's just a lot of really weird unknowns at 155 between PFL and Bellator. But good fight, not a great fight, but a good fight. Good competitors. Again, really great resiliency from Clay Collard to kind of resist all of the submission stuff and the positioning that OAM was putting on him, but it was just too much in the end. So again, congrats to OAM. If it is a career, congrats to him. And he really leveled up his personal, well, not his personal life, but he leveled up what he was professionally able to accomplish by leaving the UFC. Remember, his last loss was in 2019 to Aubin-Mercier, and he has not lost since then. So good for him. In your co-main, Renan Ferreira defeats Denis Goltsov. He did it in the second round. Basically, it was a right hand that he had over the top of Goltsov. It wasn't just one, it was one that rocked him, and then there was a subsequent follow-up. He couldn't get a whole lot going. More shots from the right hand go over the top. And, dude, a guy like Ferreira, whose ground game looked quite suspect in the first, to the point where Goltsov had mount. But, he was able to survive. And, again, this is a situation where there should have been elbows, right? Like, if Goltsov had Ferreira in mount and had elbows, it could be a very different result. Poor Denis Goltsov is always kind of the bridesmaids in this situation. But Ferreira's punching power is... well, it's unforgiving, right? I mean, you can't take too many of those very cleanly. So Goltsov did well early. He walked by me when I was walking down on the main concourse to enter, because by the way, the fighters had to walk through the crowd to get to the stage, to then walk into the cage, which was super fucking weird. But anyway, he walked past me. That dude's a tall glass of water. He's a big dude. But Ferreira's even bigger, big puncher. So clean win by him, according to the rules. But this is one of those situations where you wonder, well, geez, man, if they had elbows, what would this have looked like? I don't know. I really don't know. Larissa Pacheco wins again her second tournament championship, which she defeats, let me see if I can get the name right, Marina Moknatkina, who, by the way, had very crafty, resilient defense on the ground. There were times when Pacheco would even get her back and try to flatten her out, and she wouldn't. She was able to create base, get to her knees, stand, break away. She was able to do a lot. But in the end, she was overwhelmed by the firepower of Pacheco. She did get very close on a knee bar. The problem was, with the knee bar, she didn't have the second leg controlled. So Pacheco was able to kind of use her heel to peel off the grip. It's getting kicked off. And she was able to stand, because on any kind of leg lock attempt, if at all possible, you want to have, if you're attacking one leg, but you want to have control of the other. If they have control, if the person you're attacking still has use of their other leg, it's going to be a problem for you. And so that really ended up preventing it. There was a couple other things she had done well. She got takedowns a couple of times, reversals a couple of times. Like, she put in a strong account of herself to keep herself safe on the ground, threatened at times. But the firepower on the feet, totally overwhelming. Firepower on the ground, totally overwhelming. Another case where if there had been elbows, you just really wonder what would have happened. But I do give credit to Magomedkerimov for great defense in general on the ground. She did take some big punches, but she went the full distance with a big dynamic puncher in Larissa Pacheco, who, by the way, PFL saying it's going to be Pacheco versus Cyborg first, not Kayla Harrison, because it's champ versus champ from Bellator, right? So that's going to be her next fight, which will be interesting. Two heavy-handed sluggers. And of course, that was your women's 145. Fajeda and Goltsov, by the way, at heavyweight. For your welterweight championship, Magomedkerimov defeats Sadibou C. And again, I don't have my glasses, but he does it round 3 of guillotine choke. Just hit him with a body shot. You see C kind of like recoil a little bit to the fence. He follows up and then grabs the guillotine, sits on it. It was arm in, which you're always looking for. His arm got raised to the opposite side, which would have potentially helped C, but it wasn't enough. He had dug it in. He was driving the elbow underneath, and he got the guillotine choke. It was really, really well-timed. First fight, because this was a rematch, I think, from 2021, you could see Magomedkerimov kind of struggle to close distance, kind of struggle to get off. I mean, he was able to get takedowns, not a whole lot with it. This time, much better on the feet. He had C, really backing up the whole time, spending his time on his heels, up against the cage. This was a much, much better effort from Magomedkerimov. Because Sadibou C obviously is very, very improved himself. And I wasn't sure exactly how this fight was going to go, because it felt familiar. You felt like you'd seen it before, which of course you have, but like you felt like they had seemed to like settling into a rhythm with one another. But the difference was at times, and in the end, Magomedkerimov's, I think, much improved striking, much improved distance closing, much improved pressure, ultimately hurting C, and then able to use his he's got a very good guillotine, not just because of this fight, but in general. You saw great evidence of that. So then they had Jason Jackson, who just beat Yaroslav Amosov from Bellator, come into the ring, and they faced off. Dude, let me tell you something. Magomedkerimov versus Jason Jackson is probably the best welterweight fight you can make outside of the UFC. That's a sick fight that they're going to have. That's a quality MMA contest. Cannot wait to see that one. Impa Kasanganay, who was posterized essentially with that kick that Joaquin Buckley hit on him low these many years ago, hits that, is homeless, living in his car, and then now is a millionaire as he defeats Josh Silveira out of American Top Team. This was the 205 one. This fight was not great. It was not great. There were some good scrambles early. Good scrambles throughout the fight. Silveira just in the end not having much of an answer for what Kasanganay could do on the feet. Kasanganay leading in combinations, able to go over the top of the strikes of Silveira. He had a height and reach advantage, I believe. So in the end, he didn't get finished, but he was just kind of, not at first, but by the third or fourth round, you could see he was playing catch-up a little bit. He just couldn't quite find a way to get any sustained offense going, and Kasanganay was just very prepared. He was so much improved. I still think that, to me, it looked like there should have been an uppercut way earlier, or like a knee way earlier at standing. But in general, in terms of like Kasanganay's takedown defense, scrambling ability, defensive awareness, defensive responsibility, so vastly improved. It's crazy. So that was a hard-fought win, good win for him. Still some seasoning, I think, to go for him. But in general, this was a strong performance. And dude, to go from what he went to where he is, with all the hard work in between, you can't feel anything but great. He did call out Francis Ngannou afterwards. I don't think PFL is going to make that fight, but shoot your shot. Kayla Harrison defeats Aspen Ladd. Ladd had a couple of reversals. She had like a hook sweep or sumigation, whatever you want to call it. There was a couple times she was able to, she nearly took Kayla down. Kayla had to kind of throw her in transition and then win the scramble on top. But in general, it was the Kayla Harrison show. There was one time she got underneath the punch, Kayla did, got a body lock, and then fucking returned Ladd to the mat, and it was vicious. So she looked, I think she had a little bit of ring rush, which she acknowledged afterwards, but in general, she looked pretty good. I would not say Ladd looked bad by any stretch, but she did look ultimately game, but maybe a little bit overmatched. And of course, that makes sense, right? Harrison is huge for the weight class at 145, and I don't think Ladd is. So that was a nice win for her. Way to get back on track. We shall see what happens in 2024 about where she competes and what it looks like, but it looks like her tournament days are probably done. Derek Brunson defeated Ray Cooper. Ray Cooper was lighting him up on the feet a little bit. It got a little dicey there, but in the end, Derek Brunson, very good takedowns, very good top control. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that Ray Cooper got out of that first round was amazing. By the way, Ray Cooper, a welterweight champion for this organization, missed weight at middleweight. He was too heavy for that. But this was the organizational debut for Derek Brunson. Couple of dicey moments, but in general, looked pretty good, got the job done. Classic Derek Brunson in many cases. He was even saying how happy he was afterwards about how much money he made. Good for him. You know, good career choice to make the lateral move when he did, it seems like. So again, not exactly sure what happens for him next. Does he go into the tournament? Does he fight somebody else? I don't know. But he certainly had a fun fight. He looked pretty good. And Ray Cooper was just really overwhelmed, I think, in the end. Fast, powerful puncher, Ray Cooper, but not a great showing. Jesus Pinedo is your 145-pound champ. He stops Alves Braga, however you say it, at 58 seconds of round 3. Little bit iffy on the stoppage. I believe that was you saw both Mario and Fernando Yamasaki, the Yamasaki brothers. They still have a series of gyms in the DC area, tons. You can Google it. Google Yamasaki Academy, Washington, D.C. You'll see they got ones in Rockville, they've got ones in D.C., they've got ones in Northern Virginia. They've got a ton of gyms in the area still. My understanding was Mario moved back to Brazil to run their business down there, and Fernando stayed. Fernando reffed this one. Stoppage was a little early. Now, Pinedo was on his way to winning, I think, no matter what. He had previously lost to Braga and then came storming back in his last few fights to put together the run he did, then ultimately get this. So I think the right guy won, but I can understand why Braga and his team were not thrilled with the stoppage. I do understand it. It was a little bit early, but nevertheless, the story of Jesus Pinedo and what he's been able to do, putting Peruvian MMA on the map, putting himself on the map. What a story he's got. Just vast amounts of improvement for a guy who, washed out of the big show previously. Great job by him. So you would have liked to have seen the fight go a little bit longer. This was on the preliminary card anyway. You would have liked to see it go a little bit longer, but nevertheless, again, there are good stories with PFL. You really have to acknowledge it. OAM's story is fantastic. Pinedo's story, Kasanganai's story. There's just a lot of really good stories that they do have to tell. What they don't have is that superstar quotient. I know they have Francis and Jake Paul and stuff like that, but in terms of the fights that they're delivering, but they've got some quality, human. I don't know what the word would be exactly, but they've got human interest stories. They've got that a lot to work with in that respect. Baggio Ali Walsh, he won a fight. I was walking in when he was fighting, so whatever. I don't really care about that. And then there was a couple other fights in the preliminary card. That was basically it. An interesting night in the nation's capital here. An interesting night for PFL. Again, to answer BC's question, did it feel like a big event? Not quite. But it did feel like an organization on the cusp of something being bigger. I think they got to make some changes to the broadcast. I think they got to make some changes to the rule set. I think they got to make some changes to the event planning itself. There's a lot of changes that they got to make, but the raw material of something much bigger does appear to be there. We shall see what they do with it. So there's my PFL recap for the World Championships from last night, and let me know what you guys thought. Did you like any of it? Did you watch? Did you buy the pay-per-view? Let me know in the comments down below. We appreciate you guys, and until next time, stay frosty.